So we have seen till now uh, two typologies of society which Durkheim created. First is a society based on mechanical solidarity, right, which Durkheim used to refer to traditional societies. And second is a society based on organic solidarity, right, which was used to refer to modern societies. We also saw the differences between mechanical and organic solidarity, right? So to sum it up, the basic difference was that mechanical solidarity is based on similarity, right? That everyone performs similar jobs, has similar expectations of behavior. There is no individuality. Whereas the society based on organic solidarity is based on differences. That is, there is an emphasis on individuality. Any person can do whatever job he wants, irrespective of the caste, class, gender he or she is born with. Right? This is how it is supposed to work in theory. So this is the basic transition, and what Durkheim showed was the social solidarity, which is a non-material social fact. That is, it might not be physically present in the world, right? Can be measured via a material social fact, which was law. We also saw how law changed from repressive or punitive law in mechanical solidarity to restitutive law, right? Where the aim of the law is to restore. So this was the basic change and the typology we saw. For Durkheim, the change is evolutionary. That is, the society slowly changes from mechanical to organic solidarity. But what causes the change? Right? Why does a society need to change from one in mechanical to a one based on organic solidarity? Right? So what Durkheim says is that as environment changes, the organisms must change in order to survive. Right? So this is something similar we saw in Rousseau in State of Nature. Right? Man had to adapt and come together because of changes in environment and other factors. Right? So Durkheim explains these factors. What Durkheim says is because of progress in technology and civilization, people tend to the number of people increase, the number of interaction among people increase, right? Think of a village and a city. In a village there are few people, everyone is spread out, right? And even though you might know everyone, the number of people you know is very less. But in a city, the number of people you know is a lot, the number of people you meet is a lot. So you might not talk to anyone, right? But that is not the point. The point is that the opportunity you have to meet new people is a lot more in an urban area than in a rural area, right? And this is what Durkheim calls as a dynamic density, right? Dynamic density is basically the number and the intensity of interactions, right, which is due to increase in population, right, and reducing ecological barriers. That means the ability of the population to spread out and move from one place to another. Earlier, to travel from the north to south in India, it used to take 2 to 3 days via train, but now it takes hardly 2 to 3 hours, right? So technological advancements has increased the way people meet and interact, right? It has increased it basically. And Durkheim says that this increase in dynamic density has led to changes in the division of labor. So division of labor is the main reason why uh, the society changes from mechanical to organic solidarity. So division of labor is a material social fact. That means we can see it physically present in the world. So what is division of labor? The concept of division of labor we will see a lot in sociology, right? This is an economics concept, and we'll see in sociology, in Durkheim, in Marx, and in a lot of other areas. If you had to define it, you could say that it refers to a stable organization of tasks and roles that coordinate the behavior of individuals or groups to carry out different but related tasks, right? So just look at a factory where there are different workers performing different tasks. Each task is specialized, and the specialized task alone cannot complete the product, right? But when you group all the different specialized tasks together, the workers in the factory finish the complete product, right? Think of a car where one person makes the doors, one person makes the tires, right? But all of them come together to make the car as a whole. So this is division of labor. Earlier, when things were handmade, one person used to make the whole thing, right? Let's like there were earlier motorcycles which were handmade. The engine were handcrafted by one person. It used to take a long time, and mass production was not possible. So division of labor is important to increase efficiency and the number of units you produce, right? uh, a person without division of labor, each worker has to be given all the tools to work with, right? Whereas in with division of labor, each person only needs the specialized tool to work. So it decreases the amount of money required, capital required to start anything. Second, it increases productivity because the person who is doing the same task repeatedly becomes a specialist and becomes very good at what he's doing, right? So each person becomes very good at what they are doing to increase the value of the product as a whole, right? So in new inventions come in. Okay, you can bring in new machinery to save more time. You can save tools by just bringing in one tool for that specialized task rather than giving the same thing to everyone, right? Large scale production becomes possible, and you can put the right man at the right place, right? The person who is suited for that job goes to do that job. So this is the concept of division of labor. As society progresses, division of labor becomes more and more complex and specialized, right? We will also see in sociology later on, things like sexual division of labor, right? Like how in a family, all work inside the home is done by the woman of the family, right? So this is a sort of sexual division of labor. Okay, but let's this we will see more in feminist theory, right? But let's now come back to division of labor, the economic concept. So what Durkheim is saying is that as society progresses from the one based on mechanical solidarity to the one based in organic solidarity, the division of labor increases. And this increase is due to dynamic density, right? And dynamic density is due to the following factors, which is first, the increasing amount of population and reducing of geographical barriers leads to more competition for resources. That means resources are limited, but because people are more, now they demand more, right? The more competition for resources, and this forces people to compete, right? So therefore, more division of labor comes into being. Like, think of this: if in a society everyone does the same task, then the competition for one resource will be tremendous because everyone will want it, right? But if there is division of labor, that means only few people need that resource to produce the product which everyone can share, right? So it's like that. And more division of labor and more cooperation leads to more efficiency, and we produce more resources. Like, this is an age of surplus. We produce so much food that it is we can feed everyone, right? The problem is more of economics and all that. So let's come back to the central question of Durkheim. the problem with modern society and the problem of integration. So we have seen till now in all our previous videos, especially on collective consciousness, right? The priority Durkheim gives to culture. From whatever we have learned about Durkheim till now, we can form some laws about human interaction. From his theory of religion, religious rituals, collective consciousness, and all that. So it can be summed up basically in three laws. First, that humans use culture to interact, right? We saw how religion and the culture it produces was used for social gatherings, right? And the second point is that culture is produced to create social meaning and relationship within a specific environment, right? We saw in religious rituals how people come together and to produce emotional effervescence, right? And create meanings and relationships by defining the world as the sacred and the profane. And the third important thing, which is that the moral strength of any culture is determined by ritual performance, right? The more amount of rituals and are performed, the greater the solidarity in the group, right? So basically it means that the groups who perform interaction rituals in a stable environment will create a common culture with a good deal of moral strength to it. But the reverse is also true. In modern societies, people interact with different people in different circumstances. The environment is unstable. They interact to achieve different goals, and hence particularized culture increases. Right? Think of the modern job. You're not a farmer doing the same thing throughout your lifetime, right? But you're jumping from one job to another, right? Most people, young people, work 2 3 years in one company before moving to the next. You meet new cultures along the way. You meet new corporate cultures. You meet new people along the way, right? So the environment is very unstable, and you meet very particularized culture in each of the places, right? So, and this all threatens collective consciousness and social solidarity. So let's come back to the particularized culture, right? What is Durkheim trying to say? So what Durkheim is trying to say is something different. What we assume till now is that people who have similar beliefs or similar way of thinking, they come together, right? There's an English saying that birds of a feather flock together, right? That means people who are similar to each other tend to hang out with each other more, right? Durkheim is saying something else. Durkheim is saying that birds who flock together become of similar feather, right? So what he's saying is that when people interact with each other more and more, they become like each other, right? They internalize the culture of their group. They learn to think, feel, and behave, and the group solidarity becomes distinct, right? So this is the problem in modern societies. As people meet a lot of different groups, particularized culture of the group becomes more prominent than a one single culture of the whole of society, or collective consciousness, right? So this process is called as social differentiation. Okay? To define it, social differentiation is the process through which people become different from one another or culturally diverse. The concept assumes that most distinctions among people are not the result of inborn differences. Rather, people become different from one another in response to increases in the division of labor and structural differentiation. Right? Remember the term we talked in the beginning of Durkheim. Both of these things, division of labor and structural differentiation, increase the level of particularized culture. And this all creates the problem of integration. So uh, um, the issue is of integration, and most functionalists say that to produce the interdependency of the structures creates the pressure to integrate. Like in a modern society, uh, you work in your job, right, which is not producing crops so that you can eat, which is producing some value to the world and in return earning money, right, through which you can go and buy crops which are produced by someone else, right, so that you can eat. Okay, so you're dependent on others, whereas each of them is also specialized, right? So this forces you to integrate and come together with society. Whereas in traditional societies, which are agrarian, a farmer can grow food for his own consumption, right? Self-sufficiency, and he doesn't need much to barter, right? If the members of the family are producing different things which are required for the family, there is no need to engage with the external market, right? So this is what Durkheim is trying to say. As society becomes more complex in terms of division of labor, the structural interdependency creates a pressure for integration, right? And more importantly, we'll see later that it produces a generalized culture, a generalized medium of exchange. So we can sum up the whole thing in this diagram. As the population increases and the ecological barriers decrease, right, concentration of population increases, right, more people come together and meet. The rate of interaction increases. You travel much more daily, you meet much more new people daily, right, because of the increases in communication and transportation technologies. And hence, the level of competition increases for the same resource. This creates a pressure to increase in the division of labor, right? So division of labor reduces competition and makes more cooperation possible, right? And because of this division of labor, the social diversity increases, the structural diversity increases. Social institutions perform specialized functions, like we talked about the example of the institution of family, right, and how it has structurally diversified. And because of this diversity, there is the problem of integration. So, as social and structural differentiation occurs in society, there happens the problem of integration, right? And at the same time, social factors are produced which help in eliminating this problem, right? We saw like intermediate group formation, right, small groups, particularized culture, right, cultural generalization, restitutive law, centralization of power, structural interdependency, right, all these factors together form organic solidarity. Well, let's take it one by one. Structures become more dependent on each other as they differentiate. That is, your heart cannot digest food, right? Only your stomach can. So, but your heart is therefore dependent on the stomach, right? So, as structures become specialized, they become dependent on each other. Further, in order to provide to other structures, there has to be interaction among the different structures, right? And this interaction needs to be in a way which both of the different structures can understand, right? This is what is called as a more generalized culture and value system. You can think in terms of computers, right? Now there are different computers, some run Mac, Apple, and some run Windows, right? So but how do they communicate with each other? They communicate with each other via the internet. You might have an Android, you might have a Mac, iPhone, or you might have even a Windows phone, which is now no longer available, but everything communicates via the internet. We even have physical devices now via internet of things which communicate, right? So the internet is the generalized culture in this regard. Similarly, there has to be a generalized culture, which is no longer based on religion as it was previously, right? When culture was small and the community was small, right? But this culture has to be more generalized so that the diversity can come, so that it can encompass the diversity. So this generalized culture and values are created in response to the different subsystems and their need to communicate. So this is a very important issue actually, and we will see much more of this when we study Talcott Parsons in our thinkers. He called this the generalized media of exchange, right? So coming back to Durkheim, we see that uh, we can see this example of the generalized culture, right, in the idea of the citizen, right? So, initially, during the colonial era, people were not allowed to vote, right? Later on, some rich people were allowed to vote. Some upper caste people were allowed to work, right? Then it increased, and other people, other castes, lower castes were allowed. Women were allowed and given the right to vote, right? So the idea of citizen becomes more and more generalized, right? More and more people come into being. You no longer have to be born in this country to become a citizen, right? But you can contribute via naturalization, and become a citizen. So cultural generalization is very important to prevent the risk of disintegration, right? But there is a problem here. Problem is that when the culture becomes too much generalized, you know and or too broad, that you cannot invest high level of emotion or meaning or importance to it, right? So if you remember Durkheim, that religious rituals and this kind of interactions involve investment of a lot of emotion into it. That is what makes it strong and powerful, right? The emotional investment and the ritual performance, right? But if the culture is too generalized, you cannot invest that much emotion. So how to prevent this? So one way of thinking of this is that in the notion of God, right? Earlier, people used to believe in one God, right? Different religions believed in different gods, and like let's take the example of Christianity, right? Christianity only believed in one God, and a lot of wars were fought over the notion of God. We had the religious wars in Europe between Christianity and Islam, right? So a lot of bloodshed happened, but later, and as societies began to develop, they began to recognize that there were different beliefs, right? And this is a product of the generalized culture, you know and law came into being. This law, which was more rational and focused more on relationships rather than scriptures, right? So this way the generalized culture also evolved, right? So more way to think about this is my neighbors, right? So I have no idea who my neighbors are. I rarely talk to them. I live in an apartment, right? So, but how is the relationship maintained between me and them? If I don't even know them. So if suppose they have a dog, which barks too much, right? So I can file a case, and have legal proceedings. This way our relationship can be managed. So, so increasing level of social and structural diversity thus creates higher levels of restitutive laws, right? More centralized governments to administer these laws, and these laws are obviously based on logic and rationality rather than some morals and principles. So morals, as in we talked about the morals in sociology, right? It does not mean morality as in ethics, right? So coming back to generalization of culture, if we have to define it, we would say that in functionalist theory, the generalization of culture, also called as the generalized media of exchange, is an important concept in understanding social integration. The generalization of culture is the process through which culture and values, become more abstract and are able to transcend specific social groups. As a society experiences greater levels of social diversity, the need for a more generalized culture and transcendent culture and values increases. Thus, it pushes the system to produce more generalized media of exchange. More general and abstract culture facilitates interactions across institutional domains as well as social encounters among diverse individuals. Basically, more generalized culture means more people come and interact, more diversity and more pressures for integration, and the cycle continues. So another concept we saw was intermediary groups. Durkheim says that the amount of intermediary groups increase in modern societies, right? So what does this mean? This means that Durkheim says that societies will create groups between the individual and the collective consciousness, right? In societies with organic solidarity. In mechanical solidarity, a person is directly related to collective consciousness, right? So let's tell an example. An example is that if and when you get selected in the civil service, right? So you will have an organization which represents you, based on your service, right? Suppose you're in the IAS, you will have an organization for the IAS. This manages the affairs between you, your professional career, and the government of India, right? And suppose you live in your locality, right? There must be resident welfare association or something of there, right, which manages the relationship between you as an individual, right, and the broader scheme of things. So that is Durkheim's point, the prevalence of intermediary groups in modern societies. So to quote Durkheim, he says that uh, a nation cannot be maintained unless between the state and the individuals a whole range of secondary groups are interposed. These must be close enough to the individual to attract him strongly to their activities, and in doing so absorb him into the mainstream of social life, right? So these intermediary social groups also push towards a generalized culture. So increasing the division of labor pushes for these changes. Durkheim says, indeed, when its functions are sufficiently linked together, they tend on their own accord to achieve an equilibrium, becoming self-regulatory. In our video about functionalist perspective, right, we saw uh, the the concept of equilibrium, right? How functionalists are obsessed with it, right? They say that the system pressures to create an equilibrium. So let's see how this happens. This is a dynamic mechanism. As the system thinks that there needs to be a change, right? It regulates itself according to its own requirements to bring this change and to go into a new equilibrium, right? So Durkheim basically says that society is a smart system, right? So think of a thermostat. The purpose of a thermostat is to keep the temperature in a room at a constant, right? So suppose you open the door, a lot of hot air comes in. The thermostat will adjust to this change so that it brings the new equilibrium again. The increase in temperature is regulated by pushing in more cold air so that the temperature again comes in an equilibrium, right? Or suppose a lot of cold air comes in and the temperature dips in that room. So the thermostat will now push in a lot of hot air to make the equilibrium again, right? So that is what Durkheim is also trying to say. Society is smart; it regulates itself, right? Whatever changes comes in, it tries to act accordingly so that an equilibrium is again restored. But if the population growth is too much or the differentiation is too quick and the system cannot keep up with these changes and the functions cannot be linked together sufficiently, then society becomes pathological or sick. And thus we come to our next concept of Durkheim, which is social pathology. So Durkheim elaborates two possible social pathologies. Right, the first is anomie, and the second is forced division of labor. So let's come to the first, which is anomie. We'll say this term later on in Merton, right, and uh, alienation in Marx, right. So and even 10 markers come directly like anomie, right. So but first let's just understand what Durkheim means by anomie. If you have a dictionary or the Oxford Dictionary of Sociology, you can check up this term, right. So what Durkheim says is that the social instability or personal unrest which results in insufficient normative regulation of individual activities, that is the cause of anomie, right. When structure differentiates too fast, or population grows too fast, then the generalized culture is not able to keep up. The norms are not able to keep up to control society, right, and it leads to anomie. And without norms to regulate our interactions, cooperation becomes impossible, right? Social life is impossible. So let's define anomie. Anomie is a concept that is used both by Durkheim and George Simmel, right, another sociologist, who we'll deal with a little bit later. Anomie literally means to be without norms or laws. Because humans are not instinctually driven, they require behavioral regulation. Without norms guiding behavior, life becomes meaningless. Anomie is a pathology of modern society. It tends to occur when high levels of structural differentiation and division of labor, when culture of society does not generalize quick enough. High levels of anomie can lead to anomic suicide, which we'll deal with in our next video, right? So think what Durkheim is trying to say. Anomie, you can see, like it happened in Europe when industrialization came in, right? Too much technological advances and population growth in a very short amount of time led to creation of slums, exploitation, inequality, right? Everything, etc. You can see still happening in India, right? So maybe here, this is a form of anomie which you are seeing here, normlessness, right? Because of technological advances, maybe like in social media. The second pathology Durkheim talks about is class inequality and the forced division of labor. So, what Durkheim says is that when society differentiates, right, the division of labor should come spontaneously, right, naturally, not driven by elites or rich people due to profit motivation. That creates forced division of labor. That means it's somewhat similar to another concept we'll come across later, the concept of alienation given by Marx, right? That you do work which you don't like, right? You're forced to do what you're doing, right? You're just earning for the sake of money with having no involvement in your work. You don't feel the sense of belongingness. So this is what is meant by forced division of labor. And later on we'll see that when Marx talked about alienation, it was something that people did not realize, and when they realized, it led to a revolution, right? So, but what Durkheim is saying is that this is subjective. Everyone knows that they are aware of this alienation from their work, right? This first division of labor. Durkheim also gives a solution, which is not that important for our exam perspective, right? So I'll just go into it briefly. So he says that to remove this pathological state, what we should do is have price controls, right? So and remove inheritance, right? Somewhat of a socialist agenda, right? But this is not important for exam perspective. So this come with this we come to the end of our video, right? In the next video we'll discuss the last part of Durkheim, which is his book on suicide, right? And after that we'll do some questions based on the exam. Thanks guys for watching, and please like, subscribe and comment so that we know that you're interested, and we'll keep making more videos. Thank you.